My name is Cora Sterling. For as long as I can remember, I have loved the way light falls across a room. As a child, while other kids were drawing stick figures and lopsided houses, I was sketching floor plans in the margins of my notebooks, obsessed with the geometry of space and the silent poetry of a well-placed window. It was a language I understood better than the shifting allegiances of the playground or the subtle, unspoken rules of my own family. That love affair with light and line led me to become an architect. It's not just a job, it is the core of who I am. I live in Silver Creek, a city cradled by the sea and old-growth forests, a place where the sky is often a soft, pearlescent gray that makes every other color feel deeper and more vibrant. My home, my sanctuary, is a loft I designed myself in a converted maritime warehouse in Mariner's Wharf. It isn't a penthouse in the flashy sense. It has no sprawling terraces or gold-plated fixtures. Its luxury is in its character. The bones of the old building are still there, ancient Douglas fir beams, rough-hewn brick walls, and massive arched windows that drink in the misty light off the Argent Bay. I spent years saving and then another 2 years pouring my heart into its restoration, crafting each space to be a testament to simplicity, function, and peace. It is more than my home, it is my heart, made tangible in wood and glass and stone. This home, this heart, became the unlikely villain in the story of my sister's wedding. The day of the wedding dawned with an uncharacteristically clear sky, the kind that sharpens the edges of the granite peaks on the horizon and makes the sea glitter with a cold, brilliant fire. My sister, Stella, was getting married. At 27, she was 4 years my junior and the undisputed sun in our family's solar system. Where I was quiet and observant, Stella was radiant and demanding, possessing a kind of effortless charm that bent the world to her will. She was marrying Evan, a kind but somewhat impressionable young man from a well-established family, and the wedding was to be an event of breathtaking beauty. The venue was the Crystal Conservatory, a sprawling botanical conservatory where glass walls rose like cathedral arches, enclosing a lush, tropical world. The air inside was warm and humid, smelling of damp earth, night-blooming jasmine, and the faint, sweet perfume of orchids. Guests in their finest attire drifted like exotic birds through paths of ferns and flowering vines. I felt a familiar pang of otherness, the quiet observer at the edge of the celebration. I had designed a small, award-winning public library a few years back, and while my work was respected in my field, in my family's world, my success was an odd, quiet thing, incomparable to the dazzling spectacle of Stella's life. I found a quiet corner near a cascading waterfall and tried to simply absorb the beauty of the moment, to feel happy for my sister. But a familiar sense of dread had been coiling in my stomach all morning. A few days prior, my mother had called, her voice laced with the honeyed sweetness that always preceded a difficult request. She talked about Stella and Evan, their future, their dreams. It was a conversation full of pleasantries that said nothing at all, yet left me deeply unsettled. Cora, there you are. My mother, Eleanor, appeared beside me, a vision in dove-gray silk. Her smile was perfectly composed, but her eyes held a determined glint. Your father and I need to speak with you for a moment. My father, Robert, joined her, his hand resting on her arm. He was a man who prided himself on pragmatism, though his version of it often seemed to be a justification for whatever the family wanted. A little family business before the ceremony starts, he said, his tone suggesting this was a perfectly normal thing to discuss amidst the celebratory hum. They led me to a secluded alcove, shielded by the enormous, waxy leaves of a bird of paradise plant. My stomach tightened. Is everything all right? I asked, my voice barely a whisper. Everything is wonderful, darling, Mom began, patting my hand. It's just, we've been thinking about Stella and Evan. They're so excited to start a family, you know. Right away. I nodded slowly. That's lovely. I'm sure they'll be very happy. They will be, Dad said, taking over. But they need a proper place to begin. Evan's apartment is little more than a bachelor pad. It's no place to bring a baby home to. A cold premonition washed over me. I knew, with a sudden, gut-wrenching certainty, where this was going. I'm sure they'll find a wonderful home, I said, trying to steer the conversation into safer waters. The market is a bit difficult, but with their resources. That's the thing, Cora, Mom interrupted gently. They've already found the perfect place. It has space, light, a good feeling. It's a real home, a place to build a life. I looked from my mother's hopeful face to my father's resolute one. Where? I asked, though I already knew the answer. Just then, Stella herself swept into the alcove, her white gown rustling like wind through leaves. She was breathtaking, an ethereal bride with a triumphant smile. Evan trailed behind her, looking slightly uncomfortable. We were just telling Cora our wonderful idea, Mom said, beaming at her youngest daughter. Stella's smile widened. It's not just an idea, Mom. It's the only solution that makes sense. We want your loft, Cora. The words, spoken so casually, landed with the force of a physical blow. I felt the air leave my lungs. All I could do was stare at her, at the beautiful, smiling stranger in the white dress who was asking for my soul as if it were a cup of sugar. My loft, I finally managed to say. Now, before you get defensive, Dad said, using his patronizing, reasonable voice, let's look at this logically. You're one person, Cora. You have all that space, 3 bedrooms you barely use. It's an indulgence. Stella and Evan are a family. They need that space. For a nursery, for their future. It's not an indulgence, I whispered, my voice trembling. It's my home. I built it. Oh, Cora, don't be so dramatic, Stella sighed, waving a dismissive hand. You can design another one. This is what you do. For us, it's a ready-made dream. And we'd let you take Evan's apartment. It's perfectly fine for a single person. A 1-bedroom condo in a new high-rise downtown, with standard finishes and windows that looked directly into another office building. The thought was suffocating. I looked at their faces, a united front of cheerful, unyielding expectation. They truly saw nothing wrong with this. In their world, my quiet, solitary life was a resource to be plundered for the sake of the family's brighter, louder star. My home is not a commodity, I said, finding a sliver of strength. It's not something to be traded or given away. I worked for it. I poured my life into it. The answer is no. My mother's face fell, her expression hardening into one of deep disappointment. Cora, I expected better of you. A family is a unit. It's about sacrifice. Your sister is starting a new life, the most important journey a woman can take, and you won't even offer a little support. A little support? I could hear my voice rising, shaking with a mixture of pain and disbelief. You're asking me to give up my home. The one place on this earth that feels like it's truly mine. It's just bricks and mortar, Dad said dismissively. You're being overly sentimental. Success has made you cold, Cora. You've forgotten what really matters. What really matters? I looked at Stella, who was now frowning, her bridal bliss curdling into impatience. What matters is that I have built a life for myself on my own terms. I have never asked any of you for anything, not for tuition, not for a down payment, not for a single thing. This loft, it is the culmination of every late night, every risk, every sacrifice I made. And you want to hand it to her like a wedding present. Stella stepped forward, her eyes flashing. You know, I am so tired of your quiet little martyr act, Cora. You think you're so much better than us because you have your career and your precious loft. But what do you really have? You come home to an empty, silent space every night. I'm the one getting married. I'm the one who will give Mom and Dad grandchildren. I am building a real life, and you're hoarding a space you don't even need. The cruelty of her words was surgical. She had always known exactly where to cut. My solitude wasn't a choice to her, it was a failure. My independence wasn't a strength, it was a sign of a loveless life. My life is not empty, Stella, I said, my voice dangerously quiet. And my home is not yours to take. We'll see about that, she hissed. The argument had drawn attention. A few guests nearby had paused their conversations, their heads turned toward our tense little circle. The festive atmosphere had developed a crack, a fissure of raw, ugly emotion. Children, please, my mother said, though she made no move to defend me. We can sort this out later. Let's not make a scene. But Stella was beyond placating. The perfect bride had vanished, replaced by a furious, entitled child. No. We'll sort this out now. You're going to be reasonable, Cora. You are going to do the right thing for your family for once in your selfish life. The answer, I said, looking each of them in the eye, is no. And it will always be no. And then it happened. Her hand flew up, a flash of white lace and fury. The slap wasn't loud, not a dramatic crack that echoed through the conservatory. It was a sharp, stinging impact, more shocking than painful. But the sound of it seemed to extinguish all other noise in the immediate vicinity. The soft music from the string quartet, the murmur of conversation, the gentle splash of the waterfall, it all vanished, sucked into a vacuum of stunned silence. For a long, terrible moment, nobody moved. I stood there, my cheek burning, feeling the imprint of her fingers on my skin. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I felt a strange, chilling calm descend upon me. It was the calm of something irrevocably breaking. I looked at Stella's furious face, at my mother's horrified but annoyed expression, at my father's stony disapproval. They weren't looking at me with concern. They were looking at me as if I were the problem, the one who had pushed her to this. The guests who had witnessed it looked away, embarrassed. A woman dropped her clutch bag, the sound of it clattering on the stone floor unnaturally loud in the silence. No one laughed. No one pointed. There was only a thick, suffocating blanket of shared horror and discomfort. This was somehow worse than derision. It was an indictment. In that moment of profound silence, I raised my eyes and my gaze swept over the small crowd of onlookers. And I saw her, Ms. Evelyn Reed. She was one of the most respected architectural critics in the country, a woman whose opinion could make or break a career. She was also on the board of the foundation that had funded my library project. I had invited her as a gesture of deep respect, never dreaming she would actually come. She stood near a thicket of bamboo, her expression not one of shock or pity, but of a deep, knowing sorrow. Our eyes met for a fraction of a second, and in her gaze, I saw not judgment of me, but a clear, damning assessment of my family. That look was all I needed. It was a mirror reflecting back not my humiliation, but my worth. I took a single, steadying breath. Without a word, I turned away from my family. I didn't look at Stella's face, now streaked with angry tears. I didn't look at my parents, who were beginning to stammer, finally realizing the public spectacle they had created. I walked away. My steps were measured and even on the stone path. I walked past the stunned guests, past the beautiful, oblivious floral arrangements, past the string quartet that was hesitantly beginning to play again. I walked out of the warm, humid air of the conservatory and into the crisp, cool afternoon. The brilliant sunlight felt like a benediction on my burning cheek. I did not run. I did not look back. I simply walked away from the wreckage, leaving them to stand in the ruins of the perfect day they had built and then destroyed. The walk home felt like a pilgrimage. I didn't take a cab or call for a ride. I needed the city under my feet, the rhythmic cadence of my own footsteps on the pavement. Silver Creek unfolded around me, its familiar sounds and sights a comforting balm. The cry of gulls over the water, the distant horn of a ferry, the smell of salt and coffee and rain-washed asphalt. It was a 40-block journey from the manicured perfection of the Crystal Conservatory to the raw, industrial beauty of Mariner's Wharf, and with each block, I felt as if I were shedding a skin. My phone began to buzz in my clutch, a frantic, insistent vibration. I knew it would be them. Stella, my mother, my father. I ignored it. Then a text from my best friend, Leah, who had been at the wedding. "See, are you okay?" I saw what happened. "I'm so sorry. Call me when you can." I typed back a simple reply, "I'm okay. Just walking. Talk later." I needed the silence. I needed to let the truth of the afternoon settle, not as a trauma, but as a revelation. All my life, I had felt like an apology. Sorry for being quiet. Sorry for being focused. Sorry for not needing the same things they did. Sorry for my success, which they saw as a kind of betrayal of their family ethos. I had spent years trying to earn a love that was, I now realized, entirely conditional. It was contingent on my compliance, on my willingness to diminish myself so that Stella could shine brighter. The slap was not the real injury. The real injury had been 1,000 tiny cuts over 31 years. The demand for my home was simply the final, fatal wound to a relationship that had been bleeding out for a long time. The slap was just a punctuation mark at the end of a very long, very painful sentence. By the time I reached my building, the sun was beginning to set, painting the sky in strokes of apricot and lavender. Javier, the evening doorman, gave me a concerned look. "Ms. Sterling, a tough day?" he asked gently. He'd seen me come home looking worn down after long days at the studio, but this was different. I managed a small smile. "The toughest, Javier. But maybe the most important." The elevator ride up felt like an ascent into a new chapter. When I unlocked my door and stepped inside, I was greeted by the familiar, comforting quiet. The last of the evening light was pouring through the massive windows, bathing the open space in a warm, ethereal glow. The scent of old wood, books, and the faint trace of salt from the sea filled the air. This was my sanctuary. This was my heart. And I had defended it. I dropped my clutch on the reclaimed wood of my dining table and went to the window, pressing my forehead against the cool glass. I watched the lights of the city begin to twinkle on, one by one, a sprawling galaxy at my feet. I wasn't hoarding this space. I was inhabiting it. I had filled its emptiness not with people, but with peace. With work I was proud of. With the quiet, steady rhythm of a life I had built with my own 2 hands. My phone rang again. This time, I looked at the screen. It was an unknown number. On an impulse, I answered it. "Is this Cora Sterling?" a calm, elegant voice asked. "Yes, this is she." "Miss Sterling, this is Evelyn Reed. I hope you don't mind me calling. I got your number from the Foundation's directory. I wanted to say that I was deeply troubled by what I witnessed today." Tears pricked my eyes, the first I'd allowed myself all day. "Ms. Reed, you don't have to." "Yes, I do," she interrupted kindly but firmly. "I am a great admirer of your work. Your design for the Bridgeway Library was a masterpiece of empathy and light. You create spaces that nurture the human spirit. What your family asked of you today was an attempt to desecrate the very spirit your work embodies." I sank onto my sofa, overwhelmed. I didn't know what else to do but walk away. "Walking away was the most powerful thing you could have done," she said. "It was an act of profound self-respect. In my line of work, I see many beautiful structures, Ms. Sterling. But the strongest structures are the ones we build within ourselves. You showed immense strength today. Please do not ever doubt that." We spoke for a few more minutes. She didn't offer advice or pity. She offered validation. She saw me not as a victim, but as the architect of my own life, defending her most important creation. When we hung up, the tears finally came, but they were not tears of pain. They were tears of release. Of gratitude. Of a grief so deep it felt like a cleansing. I was grieving the family I had always wished for, and finally letting them go. Later that evening, after a long, hot shower where I washed away the day, I sat wrapped in a blanket, sipping tea and scrolling through my messages. There were dozens from Stella and my parents. Apologies, accusations, demands that I call them, all jumbled together in a frantic mess. "Cora, you ruined my wedding. How could you just walk out?" "Stella, your father and I are so disappointed. You embarrassed us all. Please call me Mom." I'm sorry I hit you. I was emotional, but you pushed me to it. You need to help us fix this. Stella. There was no real remorse in their words. Only panic. They weren't sorry for what they did. They were sorry for how it looked. They were sorry that Ms. Evelyn Reed, a pillar of the city's cultural elite, had been a witness. They were sorry for the whispers that would now follow them. I deleted the messages one by one. And then I blocked their numbers. It felt less like an act of anger and more like an act of sanitation, like closing a door on a source of persistent, low-grade poison. The fallout was quiet but swift. News in a city like Silver Creek travels not through tabloids, but through interconnected social and professional networks. Ms. Reed never said a word publicly, but she didn't have to. The story of what happened at the Crystal Conservatory spread through the circles that mattered to my family. Evan's parents, who valued discretion and dignity above all else, were appalled. The funding for the tech startup Evan was launching, which was heavily reliant on his family's connections, was quietly put on hold. My father's position on the board of a prestigious charity came under review after another board member, a friend of Ms. Reed's, expressed concerns. Stella sent me a long, rambling email a week later. She had lost the venue deposit for their honeymoon because Evan's parents had refused to pay the balance. Her friends were being distant. People were looking at her differently. The email was a litany of her suffering, and it ended with a single, desperate line, "You did this to me." I read the email, and for the first time I felt nothing. No anger, no pity, no lingering sisterly affection. Just a vast, quiet emptiness where that connection used to be. I didn't reply. The most profound revenge, I was learning, wasn't a cleverly orchestrated campaign. It was silence. It was my complete and total absence from their lives. I simply removed my energy, my attention, and my heart from their orbit. And without me to blame, to use, to fix their problems, their world began to slowly tilt off its axis. 6 months passed. Winter settled over Silver Creek, draping the city in a soft blanket of rain and fog. The light in my loft was different now, softer and more melancholic, but beautiful in its own way. I found a new rhythm to my life. I poured myself into my work, taking on a challenging project to design a community arts center in a neglected neighborhood. I spent my weekends hiking the misty trails of the nearby mountains with Leah, or sitting in my own quiet home, reading and sketching and listening to the rain against the glass. My life was not empty. It was full of purpose and quiet and a deep, abiding peace I had never known before. I was building a new kind of family, one of my own design, made up of friends who saw me, colleagues who respected me, and a community I was honored to serve through my work. One cold December afternoon, a small, square envelope arrived in my mail. It was a Christmas card. The front was a generic photo of a snow-covered pine tree. Inside, in my mother's elegant script, were 4 words. "We miss you, Cora." I held the card for a long time, tracing the letters with my finger. There was no apology, no acknowledgement of the harm they had caused. But for the first time, there was no demand, either. It was just a simple, unadorned statement of loss. I didn't know if it was the beginning of a real change in them, or just a lament for the piece of their family puzzle that was now missing. I wasn't ready to find out. Reconciliation, if it was ever to happen, would require them to build a bridge across the chasm they had created. It was not my job to design it for them. I placed the card on my desk, beside a small, smooth stone I had found on a beach. I didn't throw it away. I let it sit there, a quiet reminder of the life I had left behind and the strength I had found in walking away. Looking out my window at the gray sea, I felt a gentle sense of hope. Not for them, necessarily, but for me. The pain of the break was fading, replaced by the steady strength of my own foundations. I had learned the most important lesson an architect can learn. Before you can build anything lasting in the world, you must first design a life for yourself where you have a safe, unassailable place to stand. My loft wasn't just my home. It was my declaration of independence. And it was and would always be entirely my own.